The briefing room aboard the Alliance command vessel was a cavern of polished alloy and blue-white holographic light, a space designed for efficiency and intimidation. Dozens of soldiers, human and alien alike, stood in disciplined rows, the air humming faintly with the quiet murmur of equipment calibrations. In the center, a hovering display cycled through tactical maps of the warfront below, the scorched crust of Roshan Prime, its skies permanently dimmed by the smoke of orbital strikes. Among the crisp uniforms and gleaming weapons, one figure was out of place. He sat alone near the back, hunched slightly forward, hands methodically tending to a long, dark rifle laid across his lap. The weapon's surface bore the patina of age, wood polished by years of handling, steel worn smooth at the edges. The slow, deliberate movement of his cloth against the barrel seemed almost an act of reverence. There was no hum of a plasma core, no blinking sensor nodes, no neural link socket, just a bolt, a scope, and a man whose face had the weathered calm of someone who had lived through too much to be startled by anything in a briefing room. "Is that a projectile weapon?" whispered a young Scarith officer to his companion, the ridged scales along his jaw flexing in a sneer. "Does he plan to scare the Dominion with museum exhibits?" A ripple of stifled laughter moved through the nearby recruits. Even the human cadets smirked, embarrassed to share species with this anachronism. Captain Krivash, tall and lean with the predatory stillness of his reptilian lineage, turned sharply toward the sound of the laughter. His amber eyes slid over the rows until they fixed on the older human. "Sniper," he said, his voice precise, clipped. "You are Deadeye, yes? The one requesting, special operational allowance." The man looked up slowly, meeting the captain's gaze without a trace of defensiveness. "That's me," he said simply, his voice low and even. Krivash's lipless mouth curled slightly, not quite a smile. "Our intelligence reports that the Dominion's artillery division is shielded by phased interference. No targeting AIs, no lock-ons, no network ordnance will function. This mission will require adaptability and speed. I hope your antique is not here to decorate the battlefield." Deadeye's eyes drifted back to his rifle. He thumbed the bolt, feeling the smooth, mechanical slide of steel on steel. "Tools change," he murmured. "The shooter doesn't." Krivash's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing further. The briefing began. The holographic display expanded into a full theater projection, showing the Dominion's entrenched artillery on a jagged plateau overlooking the Alliance's forward base. The guns were monstrous, living machines bristling with heat vents and surrounded by shield generators that pulse like the heartbeat of some vast creature. "Your task," Krivash explained, "is to eliminate the artillery command before they breach our defensive line. Without their barrage, we can press forward and secure the plateau. Failure will cost us the front." He assigned squads in rapid succession, his voice an efficient rhythm of call signs and drop coordinates. Each sniper squad received orders to deploy advanced gravitic rifles, micro-drone relays, and automated targeting systems. Only at the end did he turn back to Deadeye. "Sniper," Krivash said, almost as though the word were an afterthought, "your request has been approved. You will insert along a secondary ridge as an auxiliary asset." The pause before the last words was deliberate. It meant expendable. Deadeye only nodded, as if that had been the plan all along. He reached into a small metal case and withdrew 5 cartridges, brass gleaming under sterile light. He slid them into his coat pocket. The Scarith officer from earlier muttered something about bringing enough bullets for a hunting trip, and his friend snickered again. Deadeye didn't look up. When the briefing ended, the soldiers dispersed in tight groups, chatter filled with the clipped jargon of war. Deadeye remained at the table for a moment longer, cleaning the last trace of oil from his scope's glass. He looked at the faint distortion of the distant plateau in the hologram, as though committing every contour to memory. In the corridor outside, Krivash caught up with him. "You've been in many campaigns, yes?" the captain asked, his tone still skeptical but edged with a flicker of curiosity. "Enough," Deadeye replied. "And yet you carry that relic." Deadeye shrugged. "Relics don't jam. Relics don't go blind in an EMP. Relics don't need a network to tell them where to look." His gaze flicked briefly toward the captain. "I've seen too many people die waiting for their smart guns to think for them." Krivash said nothing. Perhaps he recognized the conviction in the man's voice. Perhaps he dismissed it as the stubborn pride of age. Either way, he turned away without further comment. Hours later, the dropship shuddered in their launch clamps, engines whining against the void. Troops filed aboard, exosuits hissing as environmental seals engaged. The younger soldiers checked the charge levels of their rifles, calibrating scopes that fed data directly into their retinas. Deadeye boarded without ceremony. Settling into a seat at the far end, his rifle cradled like an extension of himself. Through the narrow porthole, Rashun's prime surface came into view, ashen clouds swirling over fractured land. The light was a dim metallic gray, as though the planet itself had been drained of warmth. Somewhere down there, beyond the jagged ridges and smoke-choked valleys, Dominion gunners were aligning their weapons for the next strike. Deadeye closed his eyes briefly. The hum of the dropship faded beneath the sound of another memory. Wind whistling through ruins, the metallic taste of dust in his mouth, the slow, steady rhythm of breathing before a shot. He remembered a younger version of himself, lying prone on a ridge much like the one they would soon reach, squeezing the trigger and watching the world shift in the heartbeat between the crack of the shot and the target falling. When he opened his eyes, the present returned in sharp focus. The rifle in his lap felt alive in his hands. Every scuff and scratch a reminder of battle survived. Around him, the other soldiers checked their HUDs, their weapons whispering data to the air. He chambered a single round, the mechanical click impossibly loud in confined space. A few heads turned toward him, curiosity mingling with disdain. He didn't look at them. His gaze was fixed on the planet below, his voice so quiet that only he could hear it. War changes. Aim doesn't. The dropship's descent thrusters roared, and the cabin shook violently as they broke through the upper atmosphere. Outside, the surface rushed closer, the jagged ridge lines cutting stark shapes against the dim horizon. Somewhere beyond those ridges waited the artillery that could crush the Alliance line in a single coordinated volley. Somewhere beyond them was the reason he was here. The landing zone loomed ahead. In seconds, the doors would open and the battlefield would swallow them whole. Deadeye's hand rested on the bolt of his rifle, the ancient mechanism ready to speak in the one language war had never stopped understanding. The dropship hit the ground with jarring impact, its landing struts groaning against the uneven stone. The ramp dropped, and the smell of scorched metal and ionized air rolled inside, thick and acrid. Soldiers spilled out in disciplined bursts, fanning toward their designated cover points. Deadeye stepped off last, boots crunching on the gravel, his eyes already scanning the jagged terrain ahead. The ridge they landed on overlooked a valley pitted with shell craters and scorched husks of vehicles, the air wavering from the heat of recent fire. The Dominion's artillery loomed in the distance, massive silhouettes against the smoke-choked horizon. They looked less like machines and more like siege beasts frozen mid-strike, their armor hulls studded with sensor vanes and shield emitters. Every few seconds, one of them fired, a concussive pulse that sent ripples to the ground and left a metallic tang on the tongue. The plateau's defenses were alive with movement, Rashun's soldiers clambering between emplacements, their armor catching the weak light like shards of obsidian. Alliance squads moved quickly, deploying sensor arrays and heavy rifles on tripods. The first sniper teams locked into position, their visors glowing faintly as targeting systems engaged. Deadeye watched from a crouch near a cluster of broken rock, noting the precision with which the tech soldiers handled their weapons. It was clinical, almost ritualistic. Link the rifle to the neural interface. Let the AI analyze wind, gravity, and movement, then squeeze the trigger when prompted. It was fast, efficient, and doomed. The first volley from the Alliance snipers crackled with focused energy, streaks of pale light cutting across the valley. Not a single shot found its mark. The beams fizzled out mid-flight, scattering like smoke in a breeze. Over the comms came a chorus of curses, the clipped voices of trained professionals suddenly stripped of their confidence. They've activated a full-spectrum phase scrambler. Someone barked. All lock-on functions are useless. Another volley went out, this time from rail rifles firing hypervelocity slugs. The rounds twisted mid-air, veering wide as if the very air refused to cooperate. On the Dominion plateau, the artillery continued to cycle without interruption, their crews working in unhurried precision. Deadeye slid behind a slab of shattered wall. set his rifle on the edge, and brought the scope to his eye. The glass was clean, the crosshair steady. Through the magnification, the interference shimmered like heat haze, distorting the world but not hiding it entirely. The enemy's shapes were still there, less crisp than they might be with AI assistance, but clear enough to a patient eye. He began to move along the ridge, low to ground, his knees and elbows finding the rhythm of the terrain. Every shift of position was chosen for its angle, its concealment, its silence. The other soldiers barely noticed him, too focused on wrestling with malfunctioning optics and scrambled feeds. He passed a pair of human snipers swearing at their rifles, their visors flashing error codes. One of them glanced up, noticed a wooden stock in Deadeye's hands, and shook his head in disbelief. Crawling to a vantage point between two jutting rocks, he settled the rifle against his shoulder. He adjusted the scope with careful, deliberate clicks, each movement born of muscle memory rather than algorithmic suggestion. His breathing slowed. The battlefield noise dulled in his mind until it became nothing more than a distant thrum. Through the haze, a Dominion artillery officer came into focus. A tall, four-armed figure shouting orders, his lower pair of limbs operating a control console. The shot broke the air like a whip crack, startling even those who knew it was coming. The officer staggered, then collapsed against the console, his body folding awkwardly to the ground. For a heartbeat, the nearest Dominion crew froze, scanning the horizon for the telltale glow of a beam weapon. There was none. No targeting signature, no energy trace. Just a faint echo of a sound they did not understand. Deadeye was already moving, rolling away from his firing position and slipping behind the jagged rocks. A moment later, a cluster of plasma bolts scorched the spot where he had been. The Dominion gunners fired blind, guided only by the memory of the sound. It bought him the few seconds he needed to relocate. From his new perch, he picked out another target, an artillery loader carrying a massive energy core toward the firing chamber. One breath in, steady pressure on the trigger, one breath out. The loader dropped the core, which rolled down the incline and struck the side of a munitions crate. Sparks flared, followed by a minor explosion that sent a dozen enemy soldiers scrambling for cover. Alliance comm chatter shifted in tone. The chaos of failure gave way to sudden, incredulous reports. Someone's hitting them. Who's hitting them? No one answered. Deadeye had no interest in explaining. He shifted again, vanishing from one angle only to reappear at another, each shot coming from a new direction, each one sowing confusion. The Dominion's counterfire grew erratic, their precision shaken by an enemy they couldn't pin down. He ignored easy shots, focusing instead on disrupting operations. A spotter's optical array shattered by a single bullet, a shield technician's hand pinned to the console, a munitions runner forced to crawl away clutching a leg wound. Each kill or injury was a thread pulled from the larger fabric, the machinery of war unraveling in small, unseen ways. After nearly 20 minutes of this, the Dominion gunners began pulling back into reinforced cover, their once relentless firing rhythm broken. But their artillery still loomed, the largest cannon at the center of the plateau humming, as it drew power for another devastating shot. Deadeye's scope found the engineer in charge, a bulky figure wearing an insulated exosuit with heavy coolant tubes running into the cannon's reactor housing. He adjusted the focus, the reticle settling on a small, exposed valve near the engineer's hip. One round there wouldn't kill the target outright, but it might make the cannon itself far more dangerous to its own crew. His finger rested on the trigger. The wind shifted. The haze between him and the target shimmered again. He inhaled slowly, eyes narrowing. Somewhere behind him, the rest of the Alliance forces were preparing for another push, unaware that the next few seconds could decide whether they advanced or were annihilated. Deadeye exhaled, the motion steady, unhurried, as though time itself bent around the moment. The reticle barely moved. The weight of the rifle was an extension of his own heartbeat. He squeezed. The shot rang out. Through the scope, he saw the engineer jerk, the coolant tube snapping free in a sudden spray of vapor. The cannon's hum shifted into a rising whine, unnatural and urgent. Dominion soldiers began shouting, scrambling toward the massive weapon. The air above the plateau shimmered with heat and tension. Deadeye pulled back from the scope, chambering another round. He didn't smile, didn't speak, but the look in his eyes was the same as it had been in every battle before this one. Focused, unshakable, certain. The biggest shot was still to come. The rising whine of the Dominion's central artillery cannon cut through the battlefield like a siren, its pitch climbing into something almost unbearable. Even from his position on the ridge, Deadeye could feel the vibration in his bones, the charge building toward catastrophic release. Over the comms, frantic voices collided, Alliance officers barking for immediate suppression, ground squads shouting that the weapon shields were still active, targeting AIs still scrambled beyond use. The countdown to destruction had already begun, though no one dared say the second aloud. Through the scope, the haze of interference made the cannon silhouette waver, but Deadeye didn't need a perfect picture. The coolant tube he had ruptured moments ago sprayed in chaotic bursts, white vapor coiling around the weapon's housing. The engineer, clutching his side, barked orders at nearby crew, but the Dominion soldiers moved with frantic edge now, their smooth precision fractured. The sound of their voices carried faintly even here, a rapid, alien cadence underscored by fear. Deadeye adjusted his position, nestling the rifle into a groove between two rocks. The barrel rested steady despite the tremor in the air. His left hand cradled the stock. His right hovered over the bolt, feeling its familiar cold weight. In a war where every weapon thought for its wielder, here was one that demanded thought in return. He drew in a slow breath, eyes narrowing against the shimmer of heat. Distance, nearly 2 kilometers. Wind, pushing right, but inconsistent with the cross-currents coming off the plateau's thermal vents. Elevation, steep enough to require 2 clicks of adjustment. Gravity, drop, and angle, the old litany played in his head, automatic and grounding. Over the comms, Krivash's voice cut through, hard and urgent. Deadeye, the cannon is primed. Impact in 20 seconds. Do you have a shot? Deadeye didn't answer. He had learned long ago that words couldn't help the bullet. The Dominion engineer disappeared briefly behind the bulk of the cannon, then emerged again, crouched low as he reached toward a control panel at the weapon's base. Deadeye's gaze shifted, tracing a line of exposed coolant pipes until his eyes locked on a single junction, a reinforced valve shielded by a thin mesh of alloy. Through that valve ran the pressurized coolant feed for the cannon's reactor coil. Damage it, and the weapon's entire containment field would destabilize. Another breath in. His heartbeat slowed, syncing with the subtle sway of the crosshairs. Noise faded until the only sound was the wind against the ridge and the faint grind of his own breathing. His finger curled against the trigger, pressure building in a measured squeeze. The shot broke like thunder. The recoil hit his shoulder, familiar and sharp, but his eyes stayed locked through the scope. The bullet cut the distance in less than 2 seconds, slicing through the shimmering haze. Then, impact. A burst of white vapor exploded from the valve, the mesh warping as the coolant erupted in uncontrolled jets. The Dominion crew staggered back, shouting in alarm. The cannon's hum warped into a deep, unstable rumble. Blue light bled through the seams of its armor, flickering wildly. The reactor coil began to glow with an intensity that painted the surrounding soldiers in ghostly hues. For the first time, the Dominion artillery crews hesitated not out of tactical calculation, but pure survival instinct. On the comms, voices rose in disbelief. What the hell did he just do? The coil's overheating. It's going critical. Pull back. Dominion officers waved frantically for evacuation, but the weapon's charge had already reached a point of no return. A low-frequency tremor rolled outward, rattling stone and bone alike. Deadeye pushed back from the scope, tucking into the shadow of the rocks as the cannon's core overloaded. The detonation came in 2 stages. First, a deep, concussive blast that punched a wall of air across the ridge, knocking soldiers to their knees. Then the secondary explosion, brighter and sharper, as the reactor coil fractured and collapsed in on itself. Shards of molten alloy sprayed across the plateau, and the once imposing weapon was reduced to a smoking carcass. Its barrel split open like the charred husk of some dead beast. The plateau erupted in chaos. Without the cannon, the Dominion's firing line faltered. Shield emitters went offline as technicians abandoned their posts. Smaller artillery pieces went silent. their operators retreating into the jagged maze of the plateau's interior. The sound of Alliance troops rallying carried over the ridge, shouts turning to cheers as the tide shifted. Deadeye chambered another round but didn't immediately aim. The moment for that shot had passed. The battlefield was now a different beast. He watched the enemy scatter, his expression unreadable, as if cataloging where they would regroup, how they would fight next. Krivash's voice returned to the comms, this time stripped of skepticism. Deadeye, that was decisive. Hold your position. We're advancing. Still, he didn't respond. Words were for after the fight. Instead, he swept the scope across the retreating Dominion forces, marking stragglers, searching for any that might rally and turn the chaos to their advantage. His trigger finger itched with the discipline of someone who knew when to shoot and when not to waste a bullet. In the distance, an alien officer stopped amid the retreat, scanning the ridgeline through a pair of optical lenses. The officer barked something to a nearby soldier, who answered with visible dread. Though Deadeye couldn't hear the exact words, he could read the exchange in their body language. The officer wasn't asking what weapon had done this. He was asking who, and the answer had unsettled them. The Alliance advance began in earnest, armor columns grinding over the scorched valley floor. Energy bolts lit the air in a renewed storm, but this time it was a Dominion falling back, shields failing under the pressure. The momentum was shifting, and every soldier on both sides could feel it. Deadeye stayed on the ridge, his old rifle silent now, his role in this moment already done. But in the minds of those who had seen the impossible, both ally and enemy, the image of a single man with a weapon older than their grandfathers was already setting roots. It would spread through the ranks, reshaping the story of the day before the battle had even ended. The wind carried the acrid tang of coolant and burnt alloy across the ridge. Deadeye breathed it in, his eyes still on the smoking ruin of the cannon. He knew the war wasn't won here. Not yet. But something fundamental had shifted, not in the battle lines, but in the way those around him understood what could be done. Far below, a Vrashun squad broke from cover, their movements purposeful despite the retreat. They weren't fleeing. They were regrouping. Deadeye lowered himself back behind the rocks, chambering his next round. The biggest threat on the plateau had been silence, but the fight wasn't finished. Not until every piece of the enemy's resolve was broken. He rested the rifle on the stone, the crosshairs settling once more into place. The war had just remembered his name, and he wasn't done giving it reasons to. The battlefield was silent in the moments after the last shot. Smoke drifted in thin ribbons through the air, curling around shattered walls and burnt-out vehicles. The acrid scent of plasma residue clung to the wind, mixing with a faint metallic tang of spilled blood. In that stillness, Deadeye stood, his rifle slung casually over one shoulder. The ancient weapon looked even more out of place now, surrounded by the sleek wreckage of alien tech. But its worn steel and with stock gleamed faintly in the sun. It was the same rifle they had laughed at when the war began, the same one they had claimed belonged in a museum rather than a battlefield. The enemy's last stronghold lay in ruins. The towering fortifications that once pulsed with alien energy now lay cracked and lifeless, their core systems fried by precision shots that bypassed every defense. The surviving enemy soldiers had thrown down their weapons, not out of mercy, but because they had finally realized what they were facing. A man who could turn the simplest weapon into a nightmare. Deadeye's squad approached cautiously from behind, their armor scorched and dented. None of them had expected to make it out alive. Commander Rourke was the first to break the silence, stepping up beside him. "It's over," he said quietly, almost in disbelief. His voice carried both relief and exhaustion. Deadeye didn't respond immediately. His gaze swept over the ruined horizon, as if making certain no shadow moved, no target lingered in the smoke. "For us," he finally said, "it's over. For them," he nodded toward the fleeing alien remnants disappearing into the hills. "They'll remember today, and they'll think twice before laughing at what they don't understand. It wasn't just a victory, it was the manner of it, against plasma rifles that could vaporize armor, against targeting drones that could pinpoint a human heartbeat from a mile away. Deadeye had fought with nothing more than an old bolt-action rifle and his own unerring judgment. Where others had relied on smart scopes and targeting AI, he had trusted wind, light, and instinct. The result was undeniable. Every shot had struck exactly where it needed to, tearing through power nodes, disabling key weapon arrays, and in the battle in ways brute force never could. As they regrouped, whispers rippled through the surviving soldiers. The mockery from weeks ago, snide comment about museum relics and Stone Age shooters, was gone. Now there was only respect, and perhaps a bit of awe. They had watched him turn an outdated gun into the sharpest blade in the war. The medics moved in to tend the wounded, but Deadeye walked past them, making his way to the center of the destroyed enemy base. There, amid the rubble, lay the shattered remains of the alien command console. The core unit, a crystalline sphere the size of a man's head, still pulsed faintly with residual energy. He picked it up, weighing it in his hands, feeling its warmth against the skin. Without hesitation, he set it on a chunk of broken wall and smashed it with the butt of his rifle. The light inside flickered, sputtered, and died. "That's for the ones we lost," he murmured. Rourke watched from a distance, understanding the gesture. This war had claimed too many friends, comrades, entire towns. But it had also given them something they hadn't expected, a lesson in humility. Technology, no matter how advanced, wasn't invincible. It was a human behind the weapon that mattered. By the time they made their way back to camp, the story had already begun to spread. Soldiers from other divisions stopped to look at Deadeye as he passed, their expressions a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Rumors grew in the telling. Some swore he had hit moving targets from beyond visible range. Others claimed he could see through walls. None of them were true, but Deadeye didn't correct them. Let the legend grow. It might just keep the enemy guessing. That night, as the camp settled into uneasy rest, Deadeye sat alone by the perimeter fence, his rifle resting across his knees. He cleaned it methodically, each stroke of the cloth slow and deliberate. The war might have shifted in their favor, but he knew it wasn't over. The enemy would adapt, as they always did, and when they returned, they would come harder, smarter, faster. But Deadeye wasn't worried. He had faced worse. He looked out into the darkness beyond the camp lights, the horizon glowing faintly with the promise or threat of tomorrow. Somewhere out there, the enemy licked their wounds, plotting their revenge. He almost smiled. "Let them come," he whispered. "I've still got a few bullets left." In the distance, a single, muffled sound echoed to the hills, a reminder that the night was never truly quiet in a war zone. Deadeye's fingers tightened on his rifle, not in fear, but in readiness. The war had changed today, and so had he. If you want, I can now give you an epilogue that ties the war's aftermath to Deadeye's personal legacy, making the ending even more impactful and cinematic.